The night shift at Luna Station was always quiet, but Elena Vasquez liked it that way. She sat at her console watching the endless stream of data from deep space sensors, sipping cold coffee and listening to the hum of machines most nights brought. Nothing more exciting than asteroid mining reports or merchant ship schedules. Tonight felt different, though. She could not say Y. At exactly 0347 hours. Her screen lit up with an alert. Elena sat forward and adjusted her headset. The signal was weak and broken, coming from somewhere beyond the Outer Rim territories. She ran it through the translation matrix but got nothing. The patterns were wrong, the frequency modulation unlike anything in human databases. Elena called her supervisor, but got no answer. She tried the duty officer and heard only static. The signal was getting stronger now, more urgent somehow. She made a decision that would change everything. Elena routed the transmission directly to Admiral Webb's private quarters. Marcus Webb had been expecting this call for 20 years. Not this exact call, but something like it. Ever since humanity had developed faster than light travel, he knew that one day they would encounter something that needed their help. He dressed quickly and made his way to the communications center. Elena showed him the raw data first. The signal came in bursts, each one slightly different but following a clear pattern. Webb had seen military codes before, and this looked similar. Someone was trying very hard to get a message across space to anyone who might listen. Dr. Rachel Torres arrived 30 minutes later. She was the best xenobiologist on Luna Station, and Webb trusted her judgment completely. Rachel took one look at the data and started running it through every linguistic program they had. After 2 hours of work, she found the key. The message was desperate. It came from something called the Kalahari Republic, a peaceful trading civilization that had never hurt anyone. They were under attack by creatures they called the Ravagers. 17 of their worlds had already fallen. The remaining 3 core worlds had maybe days before complete destruction. What shocked the humans most was how the Kalahari described themselves. They were fragile beings from perfect worlds with light gravity and gentle weather. They had never known war or violence. Their planets had no dangerous animals, and their people had never needed to fight for survival. They were exactly the opposite of humans in every way. The Ravagers were different. According to the message, they thrived in conditions that would kill most life. They used weapons that dissolved living tissue on contact. Their ships were described as living metal that could heal itself. They had been moving through this part of the galaxy for hundreds of years, consuming entire civilizations. Webb studied the tactical data with growing alarm. The Kalahari had good defensive technology but no real weapons. Their ships were fast but fragile. They had tried to negotiate with the Ravagers but received only silence. Now they were sending this message to anyone who might help. Not really expecting an answer. Dr. Torres ran biological scans on the data and found something interesting. The Kalahari were carbon-based like humans, but much more delicate. They needed perfect conditions to survive. Temperatures that were comfortable for humans would kill them in hours. Gravity that felt normal to humans would crush their bones, but humans were different. Humans came from a world that tried to kill them every day. They had survived ice ages and volcanic winters, asteroid impacts, and global floods. They had evolved to be tough and adaptable, and most importantly, they had learned to work together when things got bad. Webb made his decision quickly. Humanity would answer this call for help. It did not matter that the Kalahari were strangers from across the galaxy. It did not matter that helping them might be dangerous. Someone was asking for help, and humans did not ignore that kind of request. The Admiral activated the emergency communication network. Within hours, every human military base and civilian station had received the message. Humanity was going to war to save people they had never met. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ship captains volunteered their vessels before they even knew where they were going. Soldiers signed up for duty without knowing what they would face. Engineers and doctors and technicians all wanted to help. This was what humans did when others needed them. But as Webb watched the volunteers flood in, Dr. Torres brought him disturbing news. Her deep space sensors had detected something moving toward human space. The energy signatures were massive and unlike anything they had seen before. Whatever had attacked the Kalahari was now heading toward Earth. The rescue mission had become something else entirely. Humanity was not just going to help strangers anymore. They were racing to save the Kalahari before the enemy reached human worlds. The war had already started, and Earth was next on the list. Webb looked at the star charts and did the math. If they moved fast, they could reach the Kalahari in time to help. If they were too slow, they would arrive to find only empty worlds and an enemy fleet heading straight for home. Either way, humanity was committed now. Elena Vasquez watched from her console as the base transformed around her. Ships that had been in dock for repairs were suddenly operational. Crews that had been on leave were recalled to duty. Weapons that had been in storage were loaded onto anything that could fly. She thought about the message that had started it. Somewhere across the galaxy, people were dying while waiting for help that might never come. But they were wrong about that. Help was coming, and it wore the uniform of the species that had learned to survive on the most dangerous world anyone had ever found. The Kalahari had asked for salvation from anyone who might be listening. They were about to discover what happened when Deathworlders decided to help. Captain Lisa Morgan was reviewing supply reports when the emergency klaxon echoed through the heavy cruiser Defiance. She had commanded the ship for 3 years and knew every sound it made. This was not a drill. Her communications officer handed her the priority message from Luna Command, and Morgan felt her blood turn cold. Unknown hostile forces had attacked an alien civilization and were heading toward human space. All available ships were to report for immediate deployment to an unknown sector of the galaxy. Morgan had been in the military for 15 years, but had never seen orders like these. The Defiance was one of humanity's newest warships, built for long-range patrol and deep space combat. Her crew of 200 were among the best trained in the fleet. Morgan knew they could handle whatever was coming, but the scale of this operation was bigger than anything she had imagined. Across human space, the call was going out to every ship that could fly. Captain Jake Sullivan received his orders while supervising the mining of Asteroid Belt Station 7. His ship Iron Mountain was not a warship, but it was tough, and his crew knew how to handle explosives. Sullivan looked at his mining charges and started doing calculations. Commander Nina Petrov was running training exercises near Mars when her squadron got recalled. Her stealth fighters were experimental, designed for reconnaissance and quick strikes. The pilots were young and eager, ready to prove their new technology in real combat. Petrov just hoped they would live long enough to learn from their mistakes. Even civilian ships were volunteering. Captain Tom Bradley commanded a freight hauler called Lucky Strike that had been running cargo between Earth and the outer colonies for 10 years. His crew was small but experienced, and they knew their ship could be armed if needed. Bradley had served in the military once and felt the old call to duty. The assembly point was Titan Station, humanity's largest military facility. Ships began arriving within hours of the first call. Morgan watched from her bridge as the fleet took shape around them. Warships and converted miners, research vessels and armed freighters, even a few corporate security craft that had been pressed into service. Dr. Amanda Clark arrived on the research vessel Discovery with a team of scientists and enough equipment to study an entire alien civilization. She had spent her career looking for signs of intelligent life, and now she would meet them under the worst possible circumstances. Her ship was armed with experimental weapons, but its real value was the advanced sensors and analysis equipment. Intelligence Officer David Park briefed the ship commanders on everything they knew about the enemy. The Ravagers appeared to be silicon-based life forms from high-radiation worlds. Their weapons dissolved organic matter on contact, and their ships were described as living metal that could repair battle damage. Most disturbing, they seemed to consume entire populations of the worlds they conquered. The human fleet was unlike anything that had ever been assembled. Military doctrine called for uniform ships with standard equipment and coordinated tactics. This fleet had mining ships next to research vessels, stealth fighters flying alongside heavy freighters, What they lacked in organization they made up for in determination. Admiral Webb arrived on his flagship Sovereign and took command of the mixed force. He looked at the tactical display and saw nearly 60 ships of every size and type. It was not the largest fleet humanity had ever built, but it might be the most desperate. They were heading into unknown space to fight an enemy that had already conquered most of a galactic civilization. Engineer Carlos Mendez worked frantically to modify the Iron Mountain for combat. His mining ship had powerful shields and heavy machinery that could be adapted for war. The cargo holds were filled with mining charges that could crack asteroids in half. Mendez wondered if they would work against alien ships too. As the fleet prepared to depart, long-range sensors brought disturbing news. Massive energy signatures had been detected moving through the outer system toward Earth. The Ravagers had somehow tracked the original distress signal back to its source. The rescue mission had become a race against time. Webb studied the sensor data with growing concern. The energy readings were enormous, far larger than anything in the human fleet. If those were ships, they were bigger than anything humanity had ever built. Worse, they were moving fast and would reach Earth space in a matter of days. The Admiral made a difficult decision. Part of the fleet would stay to defend Earth while the rest pushed forward to help the Kalahari. It meant splitting their forces in the face of a superior enemy, but there was no choice. Someone had asked for help, and humans did not abandon people in need. Captain Morgan received her orders with mixed feelings. The Defiance would lead the rescue fleet while newer ships stayed to protect Earth. She understood the logic but hated leaving home defenseless. Her crew felt the same way, but they trusted her judgment completely. The rescue fleet consisted of 30 ships of various types. They had enough firepower to fight a small war, but they were heading into a conflict that had already destroyed 17 worlds. Morgan looked at her fellow captains and saw the same determination in their eyes. They might not have the biggest ships or the best weapons, but they had something the enemy did not expect. They were humans from a world that had tried to kill them since birth. They had learned to fight impossible odds and never give up. Most importantly, they had learned that sometimes you had to risk everything to help strangers. The Kalahari were about to discover what that meant. The fleet jumped to hyperspace with coordinates provided by the original distress signal. Behind them, Earth prepared for siege. Ahead of them, an ancient evil waited in the darkness between stars. The war for the galaxy had begun, and humanity was fighting on two fronts. Webb watched the rescue fleet disappear into hyperspace and turned his attention to Earth's defenses. The Ravagers were coming, and they expected to find easy prey. They were about to learn what happened when predators tried to hunt Deathworlders. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace into chaos. Captain Morgan stood on the bridge of the Defiance, staring at a scene from a nightmare. The beautiful crystal cities of Nethara were burning under bombardment from ships that looked like they had grown instead of being built. Massive biomechanical vessels pulsed with sickly light as they rained destruction on the planet below, Kalahari. Refugee ships fled in all directions while smaller Ravager craft hunted them like predators chasing wounded prey. Morgan watched in horror as a civilian transport was caught by two interceptors. Green energy beams dissolved the hull in seconds, and the ship simply came apart in space. She opened communications to the fleet. Her voice was steady despite the rage building inside her. No one hunted refugees while humans were watching. The rescue fleet spread out and prepared for battle against an enemy they had never seen before. The Ravager ships were unlike anything in human databases. They seemed to be alive, with hulls that shifted and flowed like liquid metal. Weapon ports opened and closed like breathing, and the entire vessel pulsed with internal light. Worst of all, they seemed to sense the human arrival immediately. Captain Sullivan brought the Iron Mountain in fast and hard, using his mining ship's heavy shields to ram through a Ravager formation. His crew triggered mining charges at point blank range and watched in amazement as the explosions barely scratched the enemy hull. The alien ship seemed to absorb the damage and grow thicker armor in response. Commander Petrov led her stealth Fighters in coordinated strikes against the largest Ravager vessel. Their experimental weapons were designed to penetrate any known armor, but the beams simply disappeared into the living metal without effect. Worse, the ship began adapting defenses against their specific frequency almost immediately. Dr. Clark watched the battle from the Discovery sensor station with growing alarm. The Ravager ships were not just armored, they were learning. Each human attack was analyzed and countered within minutes. The enemy was adapting faster than the humans could develop new tactics. The tide of battle began to turn against them quickly. Human ships were faster and more maneuverable, but their weapons were having little effect. The Ravagers concentrated fire on individual targets, and Morgan watched 3 ships die in the first 10 minutes of combat. At this rate, the entire fleet would be destroyed before they could save anyone. Engineer Mendez noticed something important while monitoring the battle from his repair station. The Ravager ships avoided areas with high electromagnetic interference. When human ships exploded, the energy discharges made the aliens change course slightly. It was a small thing, but Mendez had learned to pay attention to small things. He contacted Dr. Clark with his observation, and together they began developing a desperate theory. If the Ravagers were silicon-based life forms, they might be vulnerable to electromagnetic pulses. Their living ships could be some kind of hybrid between organism and machine that relied on electrical signals to function. Captain Bradley listened to their theory over the communication channel while dodging plasma bolts in his converted freighter. The Lucky Strike was not built for combat, but his crew had managed to mount some mining lasers and a lot of explosive cargo. Bradley looked at his ship's reactor and started making calculations. The breakthrough came when Sullivan tried a new tactic with the Iron Mountain. Instead of using his mining charges as weapons, he used them as distractions. The explosions created electromagnetic interference that made the Ravager ships hesitate for crucial seconds. In those brief moments, human weapons became effective again. Morgan saw the pattern immediately and broadcast new orders to the fleet. Human ships began coordinating their attacks around electromagnetic bursts. Mining charges and overloaded reactors created windows of opportunity that conventional weapons could exploit. It was working, but barely. The Kalahari had been watching the battle in amazement from their remaining ships. Their own weapons had never even slowed the Ravagers down, but these strange new beings were actually fighting back. A transmission came through from someone called Ambassador Kethelin, thanking the humans for their sacrifice and providing tactical data about the Ravager weaknesses. The information was invaluable. The Kalahari had been studying their enemies for months and had discovered that the living ships needed constant electrical signals to maintain their adaptive defenses. Disrupt those signals and the ships became vulnerable for brief periods. The humans had stumbled onto the right tactic by accident. Armed with new knowledge, the human fleet began turning the tide of battle. Coordinated electromagnetic attacks, followed by conventional weapons fire, started destroying Ravager ships. Captain Petrov's fighters used their speed to trigger defensive overloads while the heavy ships delivered killing blows during the brief windows of vulnerability. But the victory was short-lived. Just as the humans began to gain the upper hand, massive hyperspace signatures appeared on the edge of the system. Long-range sensors counted over 2,000 contacts, all showing the energy signature of Ravager vessels. The main enemy fleet had arrived, and humanity's small rescue force was about to be overwhelmed. Morgan looked at the tactical display and felt her heart sink. They had barely managed to fight a few dozen Ravager ships, and now they faced thousands. The math was simple and terrifying. Even if every human ship destroyed 10 enemies, they would still be outnumbered 50-1. The Ravager reinforcements spread out to surround the system, while the main battle group moved toward the human fleet. These new ships were larger than the Scouts, some of them easily 10 times the size of the Defiance. Their biomechanical hulls pulsed with malevolent energy and weapons that could probably destroy a human ship with a single shot. Ambassador Kethelin sent another transmission to the human fleet. The Kalahari were grateful for their sacrifice, but urged them to flee while they still could. No one expected these strange Deathworlders to die for people they had never met. The humans had already done more than anyone thought possible, Captain. Morgan listened to the message and looked around her bridge at faces she had served with for years. Her crew was scared but determined. They had come here to save lives and the job was not finished yet. She opened communications to the fleet and, prepared to give orders that would probably be her last. The human ships formed up for a final charge. Against impossible odds. Behind them, Kalahari refugee ships continued to flee toward safety. Ahead of them, the largest Ravager fleet in history waited to destroy them. The battle for Nethara was about to become humanity's last stand. Admiral Webb studied the tactical display on the Sovereign's bridge as reports came in from the rescue fleet. Captain Morgan's force was facing impossible odds, but they were still fighting. The Ravager main fleet had arrived with over 2,000 ships, enough to destroy every human world if they chose to. Webb had to make a decision that would determine the fate of both species. The Admiral opened a channel to Dr. Clark on the Discovery. Her research vessel had been collecting data on the enemy since the battle began, and Webb needed every advantage he could find. Clark's report was both encouraging and terrifying. The electromagnetic pulse theory was correct, but it would take massive amounts of energy to disable an entire fleet. Engineer Mendez had been working on the problem from his station, aboard the Iron Mountain. The Ravager ships were vulnerable to electromagnetic interference, but their adaptive defenses were getting stronger. It would take something unprecedented to overload their systems on such a massive scale. Mendez looked at the system's star and started running calculations. The star of Nethara was unstable, showing signs of magnetic field fluctuations that occurred every few thousand years. Dr. Clark's sensors had detected the anomalies during their approach, but dismissed them as natural phenomena. Now Mendez realized they might be the key to survival. Captain Bradley listened to the engineer's theory while dodging plasma fire and the lucky strike. If they could trigger a massive solar flare at exactly the right moment, the electromagnetic pulse would disable the entire Ravager fleet simultaneously. The problem was that the process would probably destroy the entire system, including any humans still in it. The plan was insane, but it was their only chance. Webb coordinated with the Kalahari survivors to get detailed information about their stars. Magnetic cycle. Ambassador Kefalin provided data that showed the star was already building toward a natural flare event. With the right trigger at the right time, they could accelerate the process dramatically. Captain Morgan received her new orders with a mixture of hope and dread. The human fleet would have to lure the entire Ravager force into position around the unstable star while simultaneously preparing to escape the resulting catastrophe. It meant fighting a running battle against overwhelming odds. While maintaining precise formation and timing, Commander Petrov's stealth fighters received the most dangerous mission of all. They would have to penetrate the Ravager formation and disable the command ships at exactly the right moment. Without central coordination, the enemy fleet would be unable to respond effectively to the electromagnetic pulse. It was a suicide mission. Disguised as a tactical strike, the human fleet began executing the desperate plan with the kind of coordination that came from years of training and absolute trust in each other. Captain Sullivan used the Iron Mountain's heavy bulk to draw Ravager fire while the smaller ships maneuvered into position. Every movement had to look like a fighting retreat rather than a carefully planned trap. Dr. Clark worked frantically to calculate the exact timing needed for the solar trigger. The magnetic fields around the star were building naturally, but they needed artificial acceleration to create the massive flare required. Her team prepared a series of gravitational resonance charges that could destabilize the stellar magnetic containment in a controlled manner. The Kalahari watched in amazement as the human ships led their enemies deeper into the gravity well of their dying star. Most species avoided unstable stars as deadly hazards, but these Deathworlders were treating dangerous radiation and gravitational anomalies as tactical advantages. They were fighting in conditions that would kill most organic life. Captain Bradley's crew worked to convert the lucky strike into a massive electromagnetic pulse bomb. They stripped out everything non-essential and loaded the ship with overcharged capacitors and magnetic field generators. Bradley knew he was building a weapon that would destroy his ship, but someone had to trigger the trap. The Ravagers followed the human fleet deeper into the system, confident in their overwhelming numerical advantage. Their biomechanical ships adapted to each human tactic as expected, but they showed no awareness of the greater strategy being implemented. The ancient enemy had never faced opponents who used environmental hazards as weapons. Commander Petrov led her squadron through the outer edge of the Ravager formation while the main battle raged around the star. Her stealth fighters were nearly invisible, but they had to get close enough to target the command ship's communication arrays. One mistake would alert the entire enemy fleet to their presence. Engineer Mendez monitored the stellar magnetic field readings from his position on the Iron Mountain. The star was building toward the natural flare event faster than expected, possibly triggered by the gravitational stress of so many large ships in close proximity. They would have only one chance to time the trap correctly. The human fleet continued their fighting retreat while taking heavy casualties. 3 more ships had been destroyed and several others were badly damaged. Captain Morgan watched good people die while maintaining the formation needed for their desperate plan. Every death bought them a few more minutes to get into position. Dr. Clark's team prepared to deploy the gravitational resonance charges in a precise pattern around the star's magnetic containment field. The calculations had to be perfect because they would only get one chance. Too early and the flare would miss the enemy fleet. Too late and there would be no human ships left to rescue. The Ravager command ships moved deeper into the formation as their tactical advantage became overwhelming. The humans were clearly losing and retreat was impossible with the star blocking their escape route. It appeared to be a classic encirclement that would end with the complete destruction of the Deathworlder fleet. Captain Bradley positioned the Lucky Strike at the exact center of the enemy formation and prepared for his final run. His ship's improvised electromagnetic pulse generator would provide the trigger signal for Dr. Clark's gravitational charges. The timing had to be perfect down to the second or the entire plan would fail. Ambassador Kethelin sent a final message to the human fleet thanking them for their sacrifice and promising that the Kalahari would remember their courage forever. The surviving civilian ships had reached minimum safe distance and were preparing to jump to hyperspace. Whatever happened next, some witnesses would survive to tell the story. Commander Petrov's fighters reached their target zones just as the stellar magnetic field reached critical instability. Her pilots prepared to disable the Ravager command ships while Captain Bradley's crew made final preparations for their sacrifice. The fate of 2 species hung on the next few minutes. The trap was ready, but success would require perfect coordination between ships spread across an entire star system while under heavy enemy fire. Webb looked at his chronometer and prepared to give the order that would either save both species or destroy them all in a burst of stellar fury. The stellar magnetic field reached critical instability at exactly 1347 hours. Admiral Webb gave the signal and watched as humanity's most desperate gamble began to unfold across the dying system. Captain Bradley's crew aboard the Lucky Strike triggered their electromagnetic pulse generator while Dr. Clark's team detonated the gravitational resonance charges in perfect sequence around the unstable star. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The star's magnetic containment field collapsed in a cascade failure that sent massive waves of electromagnetic energy racing outward at the speed of light. The pulse was so powerful it overwhelmed sensors across the system and temporarily blinded both human and Ravager ships. Commander Petrov's stealth fighters struck the Ravager command ships at the exact moment of the pulse. Her pilots had been flying blind through deadly radiation for the past hour, using only basic instruments and their own skill to navigate. When the electromagnetic wave hit, the enemy command vessels lost all coordination and began firing randomly at their own forces. The main Ravager fleet was caught completely unprepared for the stellar assault. Their biomechanical ships had adapted to human weapons, but they had no defense against the raw fury of a destabilized star. Thousands of vessels found their living metal hulls hardening into brittle crystal as electromagnetic feedback overloaded their adaptive systems. Captain Morgan led the surviving human ships in a coordinated attack against the disabled enemy fleet. With their defenses down, conventional weapons finally proved effective against Ravager armor. Ship after ship succumbed to focused fire from the small human force that had seemed so helpless just minutes before, but the victory came at a terrible cost. The stellar destabilization was accelerating beyond all predictions, and the star was building toward a full collapse that would destroy everything in the system. Dr. Clark worked frantically to calculate evacuation, timing while her sensors showed the stellar core beginning to compress under its own gravity. The massive Ravager flagship remained operational despite the electromagnetic assault. Its biomechanical hull was larger and more complex than the smaller vessels, with redundant systems that had survived the pulse. Worse, it was moving toward the fleeing Kalahari refugee ships with obvious hostile intent. Captain Sullivan brought the Iron Mountain around for a final ramming attack against the enemy flagship. His mining vessel was barely functional after hours of combat, but its heavy construction made it ideal for close-quarters battle. Sullivan's crew prepared their remaining mining charges for a point-blank detonation that would take both ships out of the fight. Engineer Mendez monitored the stellar collapse from his damage control station while coordinating the evacuation of nearby human vessels. The star would go supernova within hours, and any ship still in the system would be vaporized instantly. Every second counted as rescue shuttles ferried survivors between damaged vessels. The Kalahari survivors watched in amazement as human ships continued fighting even while evacuating their own crews. Most species would have fled immediately once the star became unstable, but these Deathworlders were staying to ensure everyone escaped safely. Ambassador Kethelin sent urgent messages offering to help coordinate the evacuation. Dr. Torres had been studying the Ravager biosignatures throughout the battle and finally understood what they were facing. The enemy was not just another hostile species, but something far worse. They were the remnants of an ancient civilization that had learned to consume other life forms to extend their own existence. The Ravagers had been feeding on entire species for millennia. The revelation explained their behavior perfectly. They did not want territory or resources, but the life essence of entire populations. The Kalahari had been targeted not for their technology, but for their large population of compatible organic matter. Humanity's intervention had broken a feeding cycle that had lasted thousands of years. Captain Bradley's sacrifice had disabled most of the Ravager fleet, but scattered groups were still functional and trying to escape the dying system. Human ships pursued them relentlessly, determined to prevent any enemy vessel from reaching inhabited space. The Deathworlders had learned that some threats could not be allowed to survive. The stellar collapse accelerated as gravitational waves rippled through the system's fabric of space and time. Captain Morgan ordered all human ships to begin emergency evacuation procedures while maintaining pursuit of the remaining Ravagers. Her crew worked with desperate efficiency to rescue survivors from damaged vessels. Commander Petrov's fighters provided escort for the evacuation convoy while hunting down the last enemy stragglers. Her pilots had been flying in lethal radiation for hours but refused to abandon their posts until every refugee ship was safely away. The stealth fighters were designed for short missions but human determination extended their operational limits far beyond specifications. The final moment came when Captain Sullivan's ramming attack connected with the Ravager flagship. The Iron Mountain's hull cracked open like an egg, but the mining charges detonated inside the enemy vessel's biomechanical structure. Both ships died together in a brilliant explosion that could be seen from across the system. Dr. Clark's team completed their analysis of the stellar collapse just minutes before the point of no return. The evacuation convoy had exactly 17 minutes to reach minimum safe distance before the star went supernova. Every human and Kalahari ship pushed their engines beyond redline limits in a desperate race against cosmic destruction. The star died in a burst of energy that outshone entire galaxies for a brief moment. the Ravager fleet was vaporized instantly, along with any trace of their ancient evil. The few enemy ships that had escaped the system were hunted down by human patrols over the following weeks. The threat that had consumed civilizations for millennia was finally ended. Ambassador Kethelin stood on the bridge of a human rescue ship watching the supernova fade into cosmic background radiation. Her people had been saved by strangers who had traveled across the galaxy asking nothing in return. The concept was so alien to Kalahari, thinking that she struggled to understand it. Captain Morgan survived the evacuation aboard a damaged destroyer with half her original crew. She looked at the tactical reports showing total human casualties and felt the weight of command. 43 ships had entered the system and only 19 had escaped. Over 800 humans had died to save people they had never met, but the sacrifice had been worth it. The Kalahari survivors numbered in the millions, and they carried with them the knowledge and culture of one of the galaxy's oldest, peaceful civilizations. More importantly, they carried the story of what humans had done for them and why they had done it. Months later, as humanity helped the Kalahari establish new colonies on safer worlds, other species across the galaxy began receiving a different kind of message. It was not a distress call this time, but an offer of alliance from both humans and Kalahari. The age of the Deathworld protectors had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.